Morning.
Welcome to the March 30th, 2022 meeting of the Government Relations Committee. I will call the meeting to order. Dr. Siebert, can you please verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it was, Ms. Reinacek.
Thank you. Now is the opportunity for citizens to speak. Do we have anyone that would like to address the committee? Seeing none, we will move to our action items. The minutes for approval are the December 15th, 2021 Government Relations Committee minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say no. Okay. Oh, and I said aye too. February 9th, 2022, we had our legislative and elected officials visit us. So we will have a debriefing, and I'll turn this over to Dr. Siebert.
All right, well, thank you, Ms. Reinacek. That was a wonderful event on February 9th, first one that we've done as a committee. I brought some comments that we did a survey. Excuse me, I should talk into the microphone. We did a survey of our participants after, just to get some ideas on how we could potentially improve and what they thought of the overall experience. And just as maybe a refresher for everyone, we spent some time thinking about how we can do it's a couple times a year. And our first one, we really highlighted South, Banting, and Horning, and some of the consistencies that we have throughout the K-12 system. And two of our three participants gave us some nice feedback. I thought overall it was very positive. They learned a lot more than they had thought they might. They really enjoyed the discussion with the students and the teachers like we did at the end at South, and they enjoyed being able to talk to kids when they were in classrooms and in the buildings with us. There was some interest in the core robotics program at South, and so we'll follow up with that particular individual and get them connected to some of the robotics competitions and so forth. They liked the time that we spent. We had that morning pretty much, we started with the light breakfast at South with the culinary kids, if you remember, and then we toured South. We went to Banting, we went to Horning, we came back to South and had just a light lunch and the paddling with the kids. They really enjoyed that. They're both definitely interested in coming to future tours. And then just some additional suggestions on how we might encourage more people. Like I hadn't thought about inviting like the city alderman as an example. That's a great suggestion that we could do in the future. And continuing to, have developed those relationships with others so people are more inclined to participate in those events. But overall, I thought for our first one, it was quite successful. So I'd certainly welcome anybody's feedback on that feedback or your thoughts on that particular day.
Yes.
Thank you. I just have a question. Can you remind us who we invited based off of some of this feedback? I was just curious.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we invited all of our local elected officials with the exception of the aldermen. And then we invited all of the people that we met with over the summer, our state elected representatives, senators, so forth. So we invited a pretty wide swath of people. A lot of times it's calendar. If you remember, we were trying to work around the floor session, and sometimes there's challenges with that at the state level. So I think we can always continue to reflect on what's the best time of year for those groups. But overall, yeah, that's the group that we invited.
Thank you.
Yes, I thought that was a great day. I especially enjoyed how much the students were involved and how excited they were to have elected officials walk through. And when I told my son about it, he's like, "Oh yeah, I heard about that." And he wasn't even, asked to participate. He was just a regular student that someone had told, "Yeah, there's going to be somebody coming through that's from the city hall." So. Yeah, there was a big buzz in the schools and kids were excited, so that was the nicest part for me.
What is the plan for the next meeting like this to occur? Are we going to try this quarterly or biannually or?
Our thought was to do, so like the one we just did, we want to do with like a realtor group coming up here in the spring, like replicate it because now we know how to do it. And then in the fall, do another one with legislators and then replicate that again in the later fall with the realtors and kind of get on a twice-a-year cycle like that we thought would be good. But if we have different ideas, we're open to that too.
Yeah. No, I think just from the few comments that are here, it looks like they really were impressed with the schools they toured, and to continue to rotate people in and have them go to additional schools. I know there's a lot of schools that we talked about including, and I think it's a great thing it's got good momentum. We should continue to push as many people in as we can, so.
Yeah,
I
agreed.
think it was a great success.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Zenobia.
I was going to start talking. With regards to the legislative one, the event that we held a few years back was very well attended. And the realtors were, they had shared with us that they were excited to hear the information because they went off of information that they found online. And those reporting databases online aren't always accurate. They don't come directly from us. And so they were glad to clear up some of the questions that they had. But to add that, so we just did the information session here. But if we do this format going forward, I think that would be even better so that they can get inside and see directly into the school. So I think the plan to have one with the realtors again is a good one.
Oh, good. Thank you for that feedback.
Excellent, thank you. Well, moving on, Mr. Zenobia was our district representative at the delegate assembly in January, and I'll turn it over to him to take some time so we can learn about his experience and the review of the results of the session with the support of Dr. Siebert.
Thank you. As a delegate to WASB, I was honored to represent the board. This was held back in November, and there were a number of resolutions that were brought forward. I believe there were 10 of them. And just kind of as an overview, I can highlight a few of them, but they all had passed, and if I recall, they had all passed with pretty overwhelming majorities, comfortably in the 60, 70%. A lot of them were 80, 90% of the delegates voting for them. And I had attended virtually, so a couple times I had some questions, but my audio didn't work. So other delegates had answered those questions, and there was a lot of feedback on a number of things. The majority of the resolutions I had voted yes on. I think the first one that I had said no to was the second resolution, which was an annual inflation or greater increase in per pupil spending. And my thought there's already 3 ways that funding can be increased. And in order to put inflation in there as the main reason, I didn't feel was a good way to view going forward, especially in light of where the general economy is going, seeing massive increases in inflation. Also, I felt it would take more control away from local school boards and administrations to determine how that money should be spent. So that was a no. There were a few things that were amended. Excuse me. In the third resolution, this was for funding children with disabilities, and there was a lot of discussion on this one around the fact that this isn't fully funded, and they had the original percentage at 60, and there was an amendment to go to 90% of funding. And I understand that. I don't disagree with wanting to get the full funding, but if we have been unable to secure the funding that really should be coming in at 60%, why would we think that taking this to legislation at 90% would be? So there was a lot of debate around that. The amendment did change. It was, it passed, the 90% amendment passed, and then it did pass overall. So we'll see how much more gets done there. We know those areas are underfunded, and of course, everyone would like to see more funding in the area of children with disabilities. Some of the other ones, I won't go through each and every one of these, but a couple that were of interest, I think, more broadly, was Resolution 8, which was WASB's national presence in the National Association, and that was around the NSBA, the National School Board Association, where they had pulled back their support of that group, given what was said about parental involvement to some degree in schools, and that situation that had created some controversy around the NSBA. So that amendment had gone through. I voted with that amendment, but there was a lot of discussion about WASB needing a national presence, and there was some feeling certainly in the room that the NSBA is the only national presence they currently have, and that was very important to keep. So I'm not sure that this will really change much in the future, unfortunately, in my opinion, but it does signal that school boards on a state level are having some trouble about how they will lobby in the future on a national level when there's such a backlash toward that group at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see how that may or may not play out in the future. So I don't know if there's any other questions on any of these resolutions or what was discussed in them or how the vote went. But that is the majority of them. So if there's any questions or comments or...
I would just thank you, Mr. Zenobia, for representing us. I thought it was nice that we went through them in the committee, be able to talk through them as a group, and then thank you for representing the district and the board.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Well, at the federal level, Congress has been active, and I will ask Dr. Siebert to lead our discussion in looking at activity at the federal level as it relates to, no, I'm sorry, I skipped one.
That's okay, we can go in either order.
Okay.
Whatever you prefer.
I'll go in the order that was printed so I don't mess everyone up. The state legislative session is wrapped up, so now is a good time to look at the education-related bills that passed and those that didn't. I'll turn it over to Dr. Siebert.
All right, thank you, Ms. Reinacek. So, as Mr. Zenobia mentioned, we had a little thicker packet than normal. A lot of that is information on bills that have come through the state legislature. So I thought maybe what we would do is, since the session is over, there's a great deal of activity. We'll highlight just a few, like Mr. Zenobia just did with the delegates' assembly information, and then Mr. Clark and I can try to answer any questions that you might have. So bills that passed both houses and are headed to the governor, the first one on the list actually happened yesterday, and thank you all for being a part of that very special day. It was Assembly Bill 82, information on sudden cardiac arrest during youth athletic activities, also known as the Chi 11 bill, which the governor signed yesterday morning at North High School. So really just impressive, and what that bill will do is, as the governor pointed out, it requires the DPI to create an information sheet in working with the WIAA and a couple of pediatric cardiologists that will help educate athletes, coaches, and parents about sudden cardiac arrest, to be very similar to what we've done for concussions and head injuries in the past across the state of Wisconsin. So that I think is just really, I'll talk more about that one just because it's so personal to us, and we've done such a good job here in Waukesha and in Waukesha County since that very tragic event in working to help kids and families understand these types of hidden killers, as they were called yesterday very appropriately. And to see that expand now throughout the state of Wisconsin, I think is really special. And the Lermer family, the efforts that they put in to make that happen, obviously our very own Scott Allen and his efforts to see that through, and then the governor to come right to Waukesha and sign it at North High School was a very special day. So that's neat. Mr. Clark.
Just by coincidence, we met with that family yesterday to start scheduling the voluntary testing sites and locations and how that'd be laid out. Just a quick add-on to the
Yes, that
bill.
was yesterday afternoon, right?
Yes, yep, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's great. Assembly Bill 316, prohibiting discrimination based on whether a person has received a COVID-19 vaccine. Obviously, that falls very much in line with the way that we have approached that particular thing. I mean, vaccines are a personal choice and a family choice, so we'll see where that one ultimately goes. Assembly Bill 446, reading readiness assessments and granting rulemaking authority. So this is the bill that would say, instead of the annual reading readiness assessment that we do in 4K through second grade, it would replace it with a 3-tiered assessment system with specific dates by which you must do these particular tests in order to help children. There was a Senate version of the bill that was already vetoed by the governor. There's now an Assembly version of the bill. The reason he had vetoed it, to the understanding, is that he said it wasn't going to be properly funded. The Assembly bill is encouraging the use of ESSER funds to fund such a program. So ultimately, we will see where that goes, and not sure if that will pass or not, but we'll certainly watch it, and our teaching and learning team has reviewed that and provided feedback on that. We'll go to the couple pages further. Assembly Bill 963, rights reserved to a parent or guardian of a child. This is the one that's called the Parents' Bill of Rights, if you will. You may have heard of this one. This one really outlines a number of different things that a parent has the right over, many of which I think we would agree with. The challenge with this bill is it sets up the ability for parents to bring suits against school districts if there are certain things that don't comply, and there's some things in the bill that maybe aren't quite as clear as they could be. So I would say that this one, if it hasn't been already, will probably be vetoed by the governor, but we do know that there are elections that will be happening in November, and so futuristically, hard to say where a bill like that may end up. Assembly Bill 965 is another one that passed through both houses, and this one is around report cards. And you remember some of the discussion around report cards for this year coming out of COVID, where we didn't have them, and the DPI changed the mechanism by which they rated schools. So this bill would call for report cards published for last school year to go back to the scoring system in the 18-19 school year, and then going forward, essentially using a similar scale, to my understanding. So we'll see where that goes ultimately at the governor's level. Assembly Bill 966, you've probably heard about this one too. This is the one that talks about organizing, or reorganizing, I should say, MPS, the Milwaukee Public Schools, into smaller districts, 4 to 8 different districts instead of just one. There's obviously a lot of contention about that particular bill, but we'll see where that goes. Assembly Bill 967 I found interesting, which is on high-performing charter schools authorized by school boards. And what it does is it says that when you have a instrumentality charter school, which we have, for example, with Saratoga and Randall, our STEM schools, when those schools are in the top 2 performance categories on report cards, that the district must allow the governing board to open additional charter schools. So that's interesting, because that one could directly impact us. Both of those schools are very successful, and so and they have the same governance board. So if this bill would pass, it would mean that if they wanted to start, for example, a high school STEM, we would be required to allow that to happen. So that's interesting, because normally in these instrumentality partnerships, you work together very closely to figure those things out. But I don't see it necessarily as a bad thing. I just see it as something, we'd really want to understand. And then Assembly Bill 970 is the one that would eliminate income limits for the voucher program, or the Wisconsin parental choice program, I guess is the actual term. So the way that program currently works is, right now, it's been working up since since a few years back, actually, to you can't exceed 6% of your district's prior year membership in terms of kids that can access the school choice and the voucher program. And then that percentage increases by 1 point each year until it reaches 10% in the 25-26 school year. And then beginning in 26-27 already, there would be no cap. So as many kids that wanted to go could go. But there's also income eligibility limits that are currently in place that say only certain kids can have access based on their family's income. What this bill would do is it would take that enrollment cap off immediately, and would also remove any of the income requirements. So it'd be wide open, and the state would essentially try to fund two systems of education, a private school parental choice program, as well as public education. So we'll see where that one goes. That one has obviously some significant financial ramifications to it. Assembly Bill 975, this one I think is a positive. This one is on substitute teacher permits issued by the Department of Public Instruction. And what it would do is it would allow kids that are in college that meet certain requirements, if they're junior status and they've completed at least 15 hours of classroom observation, which they most likely would because they have their experiences in classrooms, and they have a background check completed, then they could start subbing in their free time. So that would really help a lot of us in terms of expanding the sub pool. Just see if I had anything else here. I think those were the main ones. There were a few in the ones that didn't pass that were somewhat related to us. Sometimes you hear a lot about cursive writing. We teach cursive writing in the school district of Waukesha, but a bill designed to implement that did not pass both houses. There's one on required civic education in elementary and high school grades. So we certainly have civics in high school, and actually our new elementary social studies curriculum has a civics component as well that we're adopting, so we would certainly meet that and be fine. The other one that didn't get through both houses that we've been talking about at TNL and the policy level is the 1 credit of personal financial literacy. So the 0.5 credit of personal financial literacy still is in place, and the 1 credit one that we had talked about that was in the legislature did not make it through. Doesn't mean it certainly couldn't make it through in the future at some point. But it's interesting when you go through all of these and you think about how, when you think, Mr. Zenobia talked about the delegate assembly, 400 plus school districts in the state of Wisconsin, and we certainly think about it from the Waukesha lens and what it means for us, but all of these bills mean very different things for all of those 400 plus different school districts, as well as the private schools and schools that participate in the voucher program, which are somewhat impacted by some of these as well. So we're not certainly experts on any of these, but if there's anything you wanted to try to follow up on or you had questions on, we'd be happy to try to help, whether it's a financial or educational related question.
Yes, Mrs. Rahati?
Thank you. I just have a follow-up question to one and then a comment about another. My soul, this is so bright. I can't see looking up. I'm seeing spots.
There's so many people that want to join our committee just based
Just
on the
for
color of our
this
paper.
color?
Yes, it's highly sought after.
I'm seeing spots. Okay, the question regarding the charter schools being able to expand. It says that they would have this ability if they meet, now I can't see because I took my glasses off, the top 2 performance categories. Is there any indication on how, like, is it 1 year that they meet those top 2? Or is it multiple years, or?
Just says on the most recent school and school district accountability report, so it would just be
Just
the
1
prior
year.
year, in my
Okay.
understanding, yes.
All right, and this is one that has not, it did pass, okay. Just want to make sure. All right, I
It
was,
passed both houses, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
that's
the
right.
governor has not signed it
Correct,
yet, to our
yes.
our understanding.
okay. So they would have the ability, based off of 1 year of performance, okay. And then just a comment with regards to the cursive. You had mentioned that we do teach it in our schools, and we do, I know I believe it's a 3rd grade that it's taught. And it actually is in our summer school program offerings. So there's a cursive and a typing course that is going to be offered to, I believe it's our 2nd through 5th graders. So the district is finding opportunities to follow up and to help the students who choose to take that course. So just a bit of information for the rest of the committee, I guess.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Roddy. I have a question. If a bill passed the state assembly but was not taken up by the state senate, what happens to that bill?
It just kind of hangs out there, and it doesn't move forward unless it's passed by both houses.
Okay. So then, if there's a change in governor, does that get brought back up again? Or it's just, nothing happens?
I think it can.
Something tells me that it has to be approved in the session, that you can't have it approved and have it roll over, but I'm not
But it doesn't mean the idea couldn't be regenerated, right, and
What-
started over?
whether it
perhaps?
dies by rule or dies on the vine, that people just don't want to bring it up and talk about, I'm not sure, but it always seems like, well, that didn't pass this session, and, that was its chance, so. But I do think that in looking at these, it's mapping out the topics that they're gonna be discussing in Madison, I think, for
Right. Yeah.
the near future.
And as an example, Ms. Ryanachek, like cursive writing, this isn't the first time the state has talked about this. Sometimes school start date is another one. You see it come back repetitively, that September 1 start date. So some of these things, they might have to come back in a different form, or there might be different people that would co-sponsor them. For example, if there's been a lot of resignations and retirements within the legislature. So there might be a lot of new people, but some of the ideas, I think, will continue to be strong and maybe brought forward by different people.
Well, I'm personally grateful that we have this committee and we just get to see what's going on, and we can bring light to them and advocate, so thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Zenobia.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree that it's probably going to depend on the governor's race here in November, how much traction some of these bills gain. Certainly the Parental Bill of Rights, the school choice, all of those bills really have gained a lot of traction throughout the country, and similar bills have been signed in other states. I think the charter school bill, if it were to pass now or in the future, could help the district. And I would certainly be one to want to look at some opportunities that we have there in the future for adding additional charter schools that are high performing, especially in some areas that perhaps haven't had that opportunity, some of our students. So I think those are all excellent points. The other one that jumped out at me was also the report cards that we receive from DPI, and having those, I know we talked about that a little bit in past board meetings, of having those reflect pre-COVID testing and scores so that we can have a true baseline to understand what's happened in the last couple of years. So whether DPI helps us out there or not, I think that's something that we as a district need to continue to focus on and understand really where we are at as a district and where our schools are at. So, so yeah, thank you for the information and the summary.
Thank you.
Okay, now we will go to the federal level. Congress has been active, and I'll ask Dr. Siebert to lead our discussion in looking at activity at the federal level as it relates to public education.
All right, well, thank you, Ms. Reinacek. So the federal update is a little bit smaller document. What's interesting is it starts out by talking about reforming the U.S. Post Office, the legislation to make daylight savings time a permanent thing across the country. It gets into the bill to ban energy imports from Russia, and then it gets into that omnibus package, some of the COVID spending, some of the Ukraine spending, and then it gets into the education component at the bottom and the various different components of the education for elementary and secondary education act, some of the title funds, some of the IDEA funds, which are the special education related funds, and some of the CTE grants, which are the career technical education grants. It also talks about, at the end, suicide training and awareness, universal prevention. So Dr. Cook and Mr. Pinion have talked a lot about some of the work that they're doing in that area, and we continue to do that work. The other thing I think that's pretty important within this piece that's been a topic in our district is the USDA waivers for school meals expire. And so those expire at the end of June, so June 30th, 2022. So there's been some more activity since I gave you this packet at the federal level with additional discussions, and that continues to not be something that's on the table, just for the committee's understanding. But I gave you all of that initial part just because it's interesting to think about, a small percentage of our funding comes from the federal government in the big picture, but think about all the things that the federal government has to think about, right, in terms of all of those things that I mentioned at the top, whether it's daylight savings time, the Postal Service, energy imports, all of that kind of stuff, COVID funding. So just interesting. But overall, it's important for us, I think, to just at least keep an eye on the federal legislation. Like I said, it's not a significant portion of the funding that we receive, but sometimes there are opportunities that present themselves that are good for us to be aware of. And I also have that role, I think, for at least another year at the state level, where I go as a representative of Wisconsin, one of 3 to advocate for federal legislation. So it's always important, and it's one of our goals too, to keep an eye on both the state and federal legislation so that we can make sure that we're advocating for things that are beneficial to us here in Waukesha, but also to us in the entire state of Wisconsin. So we'll continue to do that and do the best we can to understand those pieces as well.
Yes, Mr. Zenobia.
I had a question on daylight savings time. Maybe you can help me out. So for as many years as it's been around, and I don't remember when it was put into effect, the argument has always been about students going to school in the dark and the safety issue of that. And there's been, of course, states that have always not, recognized or participated in daylight savings time. My question generally is just, have you ever seen data or had experience in your role long-term of that being an issue? I've just always been curious. I've never been able to find anything that really substantiates that it's a child safety issue going to school in the morning, but I was just curious if that's something that you've seen in the past.
I would say no, it isn't something I've seen. What I have seen in my career is the research on starting school later for older kids, right? So that maybe the younger kids would start earlier and the older kids would start later for their sleep patterns. And it's usually in most districts absolutely flipped, right? The little kids start later and the bigger kids start earlier. And a lot of that comes down to the extracurricular activities after school with the practices and performances and games and all of those things. So, I have not heard that. I think, if this did come into fruition, we would make it work. And we'd work with First Student and the kids would get on the bus or walk or parents would drive and it would be fine. But it's just interesting. I guess I didn't realize until maybe a couple years ago that it wasn't universal. I just assumed it was. I thought every state did it, but I know Arizona doesn't do it. Indiana. Yeah.
Which is an interesting one, because
it's always affected the central eastern time zone, the way it's set up there. So those people that live and work in Indiana or Michigan or Ohio. So just was a point of interest for me, so thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Well, moving on, we have an appreciation for someone special. We're going to open the floor to all committee members, Dr. Siebert and Mr. Clark, to celebrate Miss Amanda Roddy for her service to this committee, to our board, and to the School District of Waukesha.
Well, I'd be happy to start if I could, Ms. Reinacek. I just want to say, Mrs. Roddy, it's been just an absolute pleasure to serve with you, and I can't tell you how much I admire the way that you attack your board business, the way that you are just a strong community member. You're an amazing mom. You're an amazing wife. You're an amazing person. And so I look forward to a continued relationship with you and continuing to work with you, because you are just an integral part of what makes Waukesha a very special place. And it's been a real pleasure, and I've really appreciated the opportunity to get to know you and to have your confidence in me in helping be one of the board members that brought me here. It means a tremendous amount. So I wish you very, very well, and this is not a goodbye. We will continue to connect and see you and continue to make Waukesha strong.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. And right, it is not a goodbye. Fortunate that our community feels that the parent voice is the strongest voice, and I'm a parent voice, so it won't be a goodbye. But thank you.
Of course.
Well, those are tough words to follow. Dr. Siebert summed it up very well. I just know that you put your heart and soul into everything that you do, and I know that all your decisions are very well thought of and even prayed about. And so I just admire that in you, and thank you, and we'll miss you.
Thank you. You were one of my first supporters, so I appreciate those words.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ms. Roddy. I've only known you for my time here on the board, but it has been a pleasure. And I see your dedication here in the boardroom and also in the work that you do in the schools and with your family, and it's much appreciated. You are highly respected, I would say, and that is a testament to who you are as a person. And it's been a pleasure to know you, and I look forward to seeing you around here. I'm sure we will, and I hope we do. So thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you, and just good luck and prayers to you as you continue.
thank you.
Is that laughter and joy of that you're not going to face those? Or really nice.
I'm just going to leave it at that.
You're a great person.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. It's been a learning experience. I love this committee. I do. I know we're still young and putting it together. I had the privilege of being the first chair of it. But keep up the good work. You're right. There's a lot of information that comes in, and coming from the state and the federal levels, I mean, we're so focused on locally, but those individuals who are working at those levels, they have a big impact on our day-to-day here as well. So Yes, please keep this committee going, and thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Absolutely, and they do reach out to us, and they say, can I have your input on this? Because they want to help, and they want our responses, because we're here in the trenches, and they say, how can we help? So, yeah, this is an excellent opportunity to take the requests that we have forward. So, thank you, Mr. Zenobia, for doing that as well. Okay, well, we're going to move on to other business. Does anyone have a recommendation for future committee meetings? No? I think I asked this at one time, and I'm not really sure where it fits in here, but maybe it's Mr. Zenobia at the WASB level, but when we're talking about school report cards, when you brought that up and how we're assessed, there's two things that still bother me, and it's that where I feel we're assessed unfairly at, and that's at South, when they take the 2 academy scores, which are usually the highest, and they take those out, and then South is left with a report card that is not reflective, as I guess doesn't give a very good view of South as a whole then, because you take the top scores out, and now you have the rest. And so I think they should take the bottom scores out then to make that an even average. Don't know how to do that, but and then also when we have the program, the FACE program, I think it's still called FACE, when we allow our students who have special needs to be able to go on for 3 more years, and they learn how to make coffee and how to work in an environment and actually have job skills and learn how to do their laundry and cook, and they learn how to take care of themselves for 3 more years, and we are penalized for that, and they are counted as non-graduating students. So I don't think that's fair and an accurate view of what we're offering here. And how can those be changed? I don't know do you have any suggestions on where to take that?
Well, those, I would say, would likely have to go through the legislature to be changed at the governor's level, because those would be things that needed to be changed. They'd be directed through the DPI to change the way that they assign report card scores, for example, or the way that they count 18-plus types of students. I think those are DPI rules that would need to be changed through the state level.
Yes, so if we had an issue with something that could be addressed by one of these senators or representatives, we could call them and say, hey, what can you do about this? But I've heard that this is a DPI issue, so how do we address DPI? Do they have a representative, or is it just WASB that then brings forth something? Because that might not be happening in other school districts. It's only happening with us. So how do we, in School District of Waukesha, bring that forward and say, can you relook at this? And if you don't know,
Yeah.
I guess I would bring that as other
Something
business
we can
and
talk about, sure.
to figure out how.
Yep.
Oh, great. All right, so if we have no other business, I just want to thank all of you for your time this morning, and once again, thank you, Amanda. Meeting is adjourned.